Well, welcome back, everyone. Today I'm honored to be joined by Dr. Chris Schlect. Thank you so much for joining me.
It is fun to be here. This
Yeah,
will be a wild ride.
it will. It will. So talk to me about American Protestantism.
American Protestantism. Well, I am one.
Yes,
I'm a
so am
Protestantism,
I.
but I am a Protestantism. Yes.
Yes. Where did it come from, and how is it different from any other kind of Protestantism?
Yeah. Protestantism, as it took root here in the United States, I think has some features that do make it sort of new world peculiar as opposed to old world. And I would say, to put it in maybe an oversimplistic nutshell, I think that American Protestantism sort of indigenized, if you will, like it came into its own in the modern world rather than in the kind of industrial modernity as that's coming in on the scene, and uh, and consumerism, a consumer culture, I think pervades American Protestantism, and we American Protestants tend to. This is true of American Catholics as well, but certainly in the Protestant tradition, we tend to look at religion the same way we look at the choices that we have in the supermarket for different breakfast cereals. Uh, so we have Fruit Loops Protestants, we have Rice Krispies Protestants, we have Wheaties Protestants, and that's the kind of Protestants Americans are.
We're kind of shopping.
We're kind of shopping, and leadership. Leadership tends to be celebrity type leadership, where we have figures that sort of we select to follow and to lead us in a sense of brand loyalty, sort of. And leaders brand themselves in American Protestantism that way, and the ties that tend to bind American Protestants are not what I would say much more are not liturgical, word and sacrament, creedal, churchly. What's distinctive about American Protestants, and when you think about like who are my people in terms of religious practice, it's who are the people who go to the conferences I go to, who listens to the talking heads that I listen to, the channels that I tune
Right.
into.
Yeah.
Our sense of religious community oftentimes is forged much more deeply along those consumerist lines than word, sacrament, liturgy, and localized practice.
And why is that specific to America?
I think it has to do. I mean, this goes way back. This goes way back to what makes the United States the United States. There's more to it than this, but this is a good place to start. One of the interesting things that we see happening in, say, 1776, American founding,
Mm-hmm.
it's a problem that a lot of people don't think about. Is how is it that people in say Williamsburg, Virginia, would pay attention and give a rip about what's happening in Boston?
Right.
Way up, if you were to travel from Williamsburg to Boston, that's an 11-day journey.
Yeah.
And up in Boston, those New Englanders, they're Congregationalists, whereas in Virginia, it's the Old Dominion, and we're Anglicans, and we're and what it is that actually creates the American colonies to forge a united action is originally they learned that through consumer ties, and it had to do with the practice of boycotting, which is
Oh,
a
interesting.
consumer move, because it's the shipping lanes of the Atlantic and the Atlantic seaboard and up and down the Atlantic seaboard. Those are all commercial ties. They don't have political ties.
Right.
They're not united politically. They're not united religiously. They're not united, and they're in terms of distance. So what brings these 13 disparate places that all have different histories, different backstories, different religious affiliations together And it is they would, prior to when we get to the crises of the 1760s, like the Stamp Act crises and that sort. These are sort of like consumer advocacy. They start working together as consumers who don't like, who start boycotting certain things that England's doing to them.
Right.
And so that becomes the activity that helps a Virginian imagine, I am with that Bostonian,
Right.
which is quite a feat of the imagination. I'm with him, but how in the world are you with him?
Right.
And that's how you start to imagine themselves. That's even a consumer move. Again, it's a historical problem. We tend to, of course, we know what happens with the American Revolution, the independence period, but we tend to look at the colonial unity of the early republic, or excuse me, the national unity of the early republic later, from 1820s, 30s, Andrew Jackson. Yeah, we're a country then. And so we simply sort of read that back into history when that unity didn't used to be there. That unity itself is a historically contingent developing phenomenon, and it developed as consumer relationships.
Got it. So it was kind of like it started off as we both don't like the same guy.
We don't like the same guy, and you and I are together because we buy the same product, and we
Right.
don't like the taxes that are being attached to it, and so there we have it.
And so I would assume that this kind of started with, or at least was emphasized by the Boston Tea Party and all that activity. Because that was kind of the big...
it's an indication of it. It's an indication of the sort of thing that I'm talking about. Yeah, it's like a signpost that says, "Hey, what's going on here?"
Right.
And so, and of course, then that's going to start creating relationships where you get kind of more or less shared ideology. That's going to come later. But the original forging bonds were consumerist.
Right. So how did that then bleed into religion? Because that seems like a bit of a jump.
Well, first of all, that's we also start to see when we create a nation, and especially under the Constitution, and we get a First Amendment, which the early Congress adopts and it gets ratified. Religion becomes an interesting problem in this because you have all these different colonies turned states that have established religions. You've got the Quakers and the Presbyterians in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. You have the Congregationalists up in New England and Massachusetts, Connecticut. You've got Anglicans in Virginia. Georgia is a mixture of all kinds of things. Maryland's got a bunch of Catholics. I mean, it's Maryland after all. And so how does this all come together? And we wind up basically punting on the question of religion, leaving that to local, regional, states to kind of sort out. And over time, as markets start to develop, Americans start choosing more and more, they choose their religious leaders according to marketplace attitudes and postures and behaviors. And so by the time we get to the 1820s, the 1830s, what we call the Second Great Awakening, we have this wild sort of ferment of spiritual hothouse. It includes hucksters. This is when we get, the Campbellites, the Mormons, the Adventists, and in the mix, you've got the Baptists, you got the Presbyterians, you got the Anglicans, and how do we make a decision? How do we make a decision on where to go to church? Is it because of the neighborhood I'm in? I'm starting to make consumer choices here, and that's a uniquely American thing. And I'm not saying that commerce was certainly alien to the old world. It's just that religious institutions, religious practices, and religious behaviors had more deeply baked in, and so the consumerist posturing, I think, really was indigenous to American religion. It was a later tack on to Old World religious practice.
Got it. And so
like we're consumer natives,
right? That is America's big thing.
Yeah, that's America. Whereas I think there's consumer. Part of it has to do with the way that the American economy and you get into the 20th century and the influence of the United States and the two world wars. The 20th century, a lot of American ways, just like Levi's and Kentucky Fried Chicken and McDonald's migrate over around the world. These consumer practices are not unique to America anymore. Yeah. Although I think that this is the seedbed of it.
Right. And I'm sure that was, or maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like that would be the kind of thing that was created because of the the speed at which American culture and livelihood kind of took place.
I think you're right about that. And that's one of the factors. Another factor is just the diversity of, all these peoples coming from the old world, from their communities, sort of creating new communities over here. And then of course they meet Native Americans who are also here. It's just this kind of crazy place that doesn't have a deep heritage. And so in the consumerist markets are emerging during this time, modern markets, and we have religious practices that begin in the environment of modern markets.
Right. Got it. And so what was the reason that wasn't implanted in a place like England? Because they also have commerce, as you
yeah, exactly. But in England, let's see, the European sort of deluge of people coming to the New World is, it's a trickle in the 17th century. It's a lot more in the 18th century. It's tons more in the 19th century. I don't have the stats at my fingertips, but that's easy enough to look at. Whereas in the old world, in fact, England is one of the places where industrialization really set in. But England had this deep, going back hundreds and hundreds of years. You're down in Wessex is different than Northumbria, which is different than East Anglia, which is different than Sussex. And in fact, still today, this is becoming less and less true. But especially a generation or two ago, which is pretty recent. Within living memory, people who are still alive can remember if you were to drive from the south of England to the north of England, which, you and I are here in the West, that's like driving from here to Boise.
Right.
Or from here to Seattle, a 6-hour drive, right? You would be traveling through a number of different language groups.
Interesting.
Different, yeah. And I should say dialects, that would be more accurate.
Yeah.
A number of different dialects that are as different as like the Deep South versus the Midwest.
Yeah.
And several changes like that you would go through in England. And that goes, and the church buildings that are there are church buildings that would be hundreds of years old already. Right. And then industrialization gets layered on top of something that's already there. Right?
Got it.
Versus industrialization and consumer life arriving with the people who are arriving, many of whom are arriving because of consumer activity.
Right. They come for the
commercial
job.
Activity. Right.
And then that bleeds over.
Right, exactly. So that's why the difference between old and new world. And so I'd say, again, it's native to American. It's a late adoption to that. It's like
England.
Yeah, it's the difference between you on the internet versus your grandfather on the internet. You're an internet native. Your grandfather he's native.
It.
He's adopted it later. So, consumer approach to religion in England is kind of like that.
Right. It's the same thing, but it's just how you use it is different. Because for me, the internet is part of the formation of who and what I am. For him, it's just like a cool thing he found when he was later in life.
There's some and there's some some ways of life and ways of religious practice, again, to follow the analogy, ways of being and getting along in the world where the internet is layered on top of that rather than something that itself forms you.
So is American...
So, I mean, your question was, hopefully this makes sense. You're asking what's uniquely American about American Protestantism. That's what I would point to.
It's the consumer focus.
The consumer orientation that has a cultural shaping influence on American Protestantism.
Got it. And that's its definition, you would probably say.
Yeah, if you're going to say American Protestantism, but then you could say, well, tell me about American Presbyterians or American Baptists or American, then I would get much more particular. But American religion, I think that's what makes us peculiar.
Yeah. And is that kind of thing, do you see it as a net good or a net bad?
This is probably because I'm an old codger kind of guy. Intellectually, I think, okay, there's trade-offs. And so good and bad intellectually. Dispositionally, I'm inclined to just think bad.
Just because it's too new.
Well, it's too new. Not merely because it's new. I am sensitive to the downsides of it. I don't. Yeah. Well, here's an analogy, and maybe this will tell you a little bit about me. Jackson, it's weird that you and I are having this conversation in front of a camera and microphones. And I'll just be honest. You reached out to me. I think, oh, it's Jackson. This is great. If you had reached out to me saying, hey, Dr. Schlect, can we get coffee? And I've got some questions about history and we'll have a conversation. My interest level in participating would be way higher.
Yeah.
It's just, why do we need to broadcast this to other people?
Right.
What is the instinct? And I don't get that, Jackson.
Yeah.
I mean, no, I'm putting this to you. Why? Why not you and I just have coffee and have this conversation without the microphones? Why do we have to broadcast our life?
It's a good question. And probably the best reason I've come up with is somewhat twofold. The first is I will forget what we said.
Okay.
And so it's nice to have a recording. Okay. I can go back and watch it. And that's what I learned. Mm-hmm. The second part is, it actually started with my mom wanted updates when I was going out to Zambia. She wanted updates from me all the time. And I didn't want to
I love that. I love that.
Hey, Mom, here's how I'm doing. Instead, I was like, what if I just filmed talking to people out there who are experts in this culture so that she could understand this is more of,
and sort of live vicariously
Jackson
with you.
Is in at the moment.
Right.
And then it turned into, well, actually some other people like this as well. And found it interesting. Hey, these are Africans. These are people I would never interact with ever. And many people over here will never probably have the chance. And so they get to live vicariously through me and learn a lot of these things as I'm learning them.
Right.
And so it was like, okay, well, where else can I take this? I want to learn more. And most likely other people do as well. But they're not everyone has the chance to. Moscow is specifically unique about this. There's a bunch of people in Moscow who are way overqualified to be here.
Way overqualified to be.
A lot of the people here are from Amazon or Microsoft. They were in Seattle. They were big in the tech world, or they were on the East Coast. They were high level medical doctors. They come over here because of the church. And so they have a unique expertise that really doesn't belong in a town of this size.
Okay.
If you went to Pullman, you wouldn't really come across the same number of caliber of people that you have in Moscow that have accumulated around Christchurch and this idea. And so it was okay, well, if I can show that the expertise and the knowledge that these people have to the rest of the world, who will probably not get to interact with these people, because this is a novel thing, taking Christ and involving him in all areas of life. That is the kind of thing that is useful to other people.
Okay.
That's the idea behind it.
Yeah. But this is such an exhibit of American religious
I'm
ties.
sure it is 100%.
Yeah, and it's just hilarious. And of course, I mean, if I were objecting to it, I would be the hypocrite because I'm participating here, right? So it's just, but I also just think sort of the joke's on us. I mean, it's so weird. I would hope for my congregation, for you, and I think you would share this, that the people that you're sitting next to, that you're breaking bread with, that your, word and sacrament, that's where the action is, right?
Absolutely.
And so people who are listening to this, if they are just wrapped in giving it full attention, then they need to get a life. People who are listening to this are probably, if they're fruitful people doing what they're doing, they're on their commute, they're on their
Absolutely.
they're mowing their lawn or something like
this
like
is no substitute for community.
Right, exactly
100%.
But one of the, and I know you would agree with that, but this comes back to one of the peculiar things about American Christianity, though, and this is something that goes back into the 1800s, is that Americans become really they're really interesting for forming religious bonds around media, sort of mediated realities. Again, I went to, rather than word and sacrament, I went to this conference with this guy, I went to a D.L. Moody revival. You went to a D.L. Moody revival, so we're brothers,
right,
in a way that's deeper than the person you're sitting next to
in church. Yes.
That's American Christianity.
And I would absolutely agree that is a problem.
That's a problem.
And the lack of community in America is striking considering other parts of the world. I was speaking to one of the Swaits earlier, and they're from Brazil. Right. And he was explaining, in Brazil, like, your friends just come over. Friends and family just come over to your house all the time, uninvited. They just show up. And you're expected to, like it's completely normal. Right. It would be like your siblings showing up at your house. Like, duh.
Right.
And that kind of thing we don't really have here. And I wonder if part of it is because America is so big.
That's another layer to it too. When you look at the old world, old world Europe, and you just even, this is easy enough to do. You just put a map of America superimposed off the map of Europe, and you think, boy, Hungary, and we think that the Eastern Seaboard and us out here in the West are part of the same country, but you just take that same geographical space and you put it on other places. I mean, again, different cultures, language groups, religious orientations, bitter enemies.
Yeah.
It's just, to occupy a sea to shining sea continent the way we do is bizarre.
Yes, and the fact that, like, because I'm sure it's similar in Russia, like you've got Moscow and St. Petersburg, and then on the other side, you closer to China, you got other large cities, but kind of in the middle, I don't think there's a whole lot of civilization there. Whereas America, it feels a little more like we do have our big cities on our coasts, but then there's also a somewhat even spread in the middle of people who are living their lives and have their own civilizations.
Right.
Like, you could go to Kansas City, which is like in the middle of America, and it doesn't, like, there's no middle of Russia, huge city. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. But when we get into industrial modernity, we tune into the same TV stations. Earlier, before then, it was radio stations. Before that, it's actually around in the 1890s where we start to see, real habitation along with media, like nationally circulating magazines come along in the 1890s, which was a technological marvel. Magazines that are printed in New York, and you and I might read them, and so we start to experience weird things like young men's vision for what a pretty girl looks like is
changed.
Is no longer I mean, this can be petty or this can be noble, and pettiness goes. It's all throughout history. It's not. I'm not saying a better or worse. I'm saying it used to be like the girls you knew and would talk about, but now it's the girls you read about and you see, which
you
is
follow on Instagram and
yeah. Well, and today it's on Instagram, but back then it was, Charles Dana Gibson's magazine illustrations. And so girls would start imitating that rather than sort of developing their own culture of what's fashionable and how to do your hair and how to, things like that.
Absolutely. And part of it, I think, and I may be wrong, is also because of I don't know who's trying to do this, but the trying to unite America. Because we're so big, you have to unite people in San Francisco with people in Boston.
Yep.
And it doesn't make sense for that to be the case, especially when you're coming. These people, like when they're immigrating, they're coming from like Germany, where like Germans have their own distinct uniform, like outfits that they wear, and culture and language and food and music and all of that. And the idea to have America have its own culture and language and food and clothes and all of that, so that like someone in San Francisco would be wearing something similar to someone in New York, is wild.
Oh yeah, you're exactly right. And it's interesting that you say German. Of course, Germany wasn't a country until as recently as 1870.
Yeah.
Why didn't you say Swabian or Saxon or Bavarian? You said German, which assumes a unity of a people group that's. You said German. That's just they have their own distinctive. That's kind of like, there's certain times in history. I'm just being playful with you here.
No, go ahead.
And relating to it though too. I knew what you meant with Germany, but you said they have their own distinctive thing. That's just as silly as white guys like us saying, "Oh, well, it's just like those Asians." And then if you talk to a Korean and you ask a Korean if he's part of the same culture as a Japanese,
they hate
and
each
part
other.
of the same culture as a Chinese and a Vietnamese, and then we just say those Asians, and you say those Germans, they have their own distinctive, and that's and I think you're quite right to say Americans, asked this. It's the same sort of problematic kind of thing.
Yeah, it is, but I don't think there's anything wrong with calling them the Germans.
I'm not. No, just
it may not be totally accurate, 100%.
Right. Well, yeah, and it's fine to refer to someone as an Asian,
right?
So long as you understand. Oh, that means that there are different. Like I'm a North American,
right?
In the same way that a Mexican and a Canadian is.
Yes.
Right. So it's fine. So it's not wrong. Just understand what we're grouping but what that group doesn't include.
Yeah.
There are lots of cultural features that can't fit into the old wineskins of German.
Yes. 100%. No.
Right.
Totally agree.
So,
and there's an Idahoan is wildly different from a Texan, who's wildly different from someone in Maine.
Right.
And it's almost like we've got our own separate countries that we kind of slapped together, and called, including a random island out in the middle of the Pacific, and something we stole from Canada.
Right. Although I do think that and here's where I'll caveat though, I think Americans as early adopters of industrial technology and of modern industrialization sort of hitting us at a time when we were still moving across our continent. Westward expansion and all that. Westward expansion is part and parcel with industrialization.
Yeah.
That our attachments, our ways of attaching ourselves to sort of consumer networks rather than lived localized networks, I think we Americans are much more native to the consumer network types
100%
than other people's are.
Absolutely.
I mean, you went to Zambia. I bet that was really true there.
Very much so. Yeah. They like everyone there feels like, and even acts like they are all one giant family.
Yeah.
In a way that is utterly foreign to America.
Right.
I'll explain that. Like, I feel the same. Well, not this. Well, maybe the same amount of kindred I feel with an NSA student who I haven't met, who I maybe go to the same church with, but haven't interacted with them, that I do with someone on the other side of, someone in Texas who records videos. And who's on YouTube or is a TV star. And like you have Americans specifically, I don't know that this is as much of a temptation to other countries and peoples. We feel a community with a person whom we've never met because we've seen them on the screen and we watch them or we listen to them or read their content all the time. And so we feel
you're getting
we substitute that for community.
You're getting at that. And then we're coming back full circle to your original question. American Christianity, that does something to America's religious life and our way of practicing, our way of believing, our way of the bonds together that we share as part of a religious community. We tend toward branding, we tend toward market sorts of bonding.
It's all about the individual. Which is one of the things that separates it from Europe, where Europe seems more about the family structure and the culture there, and even Europe in general is more focused on an understanding of the fact that the family is the building block. I was talking to Daniel Fukushon, and he was saying that the largest anti-homosexual rally in the world that's ever happened was in France. Which is somewhat shocking if you know who France is, right? You wouldn't think of them as people who would participate in that kind of event. But because they understand that like a man and a woman and their children is the building block of society, people were protesting that in the millions, including homosexuals, because they understand that like this is about the family. And America is far more about the individual. It's about me and what can I become, as opposed to what can this become?
I think when we connect ourselves in mediated ways, we also wind up slicing and dicing ourselves so that it's a portion of me that relates to you. And it tends to be very transactional too. That's
yes.
So when let's come back to this podcast. Someone's doing their chores, I don't know, painting the fence while they're listening to this podcast. I hope that you're not listening to this podcast by just sitting there listening. And that
is a horrible idea. Do not do that. Do not do that.
This is kind of, that's just a weird way to consume a podcast.
Oh right? It's kind of like the fact that we do that at all really is strange.
Right. When it comes back to I'm delighted to sit down and have a conversation with you over coffee. I would be very happy to get rid of the microphones and not broadcast this.
Right.
And we'll have the same conversation. And it'd be delightful. And that's because that forges a relationship.
Right.
You and I go back in some interesting ways. My daughter babysat you.
Oh wow, that's true. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Oh, that's right. We just
That's true. Yeah, it has been a minute.
It's been a minute. That's right. Oh yeah, you drew the color of your.
Yeah.
You're a crappy shits. This is great. And so let's get together for coffee and we'll talk history and we'll talk about these sorts of things. Again, the need to broadcast this is kind of odd. So then, listen. What piece of you does your listener have in relationship to you?
Right, it has this face.
And that's what I mean by slicing and dicing a little bit. And,
absolutely.
And so if you say, when you talk about sort of like online community or podcast community, that's just kind of weird. It's this deep.
Oh no,
and
absolutely.
And to participate it is just this much of who you are, Jackson, because you are a much thicker existence than what this represents.
Absolutely. Yes. Right. And the fact that people would go online and fight about things that someone has, not me particularly, but other things that someone has said, because and
people care
I know.
So dang much about what is
wild.
Said online. Yeah.
It's there's a famous tweet where some guy commented, how are you being cyberbullied? Just close the computer. Like, there's a very simple solution. And get off the internet.
Right. Get off the internet. Maybe if you need to, shut down this podcast, but start investing in people around you.
Yes.
Maybe people who are different than you.
100%.
Which means it takes a lot more work.
Absolutely.
Which is another thing about the internet is that it's community on the cheap.
It is. Yes.
It's totally, because, when you're living next to your next door neighbor, they might have different views than you, maybe different background, different level of education, whatever it might be. And you got to deal with one another in real time. That takes work. And then it winds up sandpapering you in the process. And
you become a better person.
You become a better person because you have to deal with this other person that you might think is a crank. But you need to, okay, and maybe they are, let's say, but maybe he thinks you're a crank,
Right.
But that's community. That
exactly.
Big mess is community, and those kinds of, and then you work through things like that, and then it gets much deeper.
Yeah, and the problem with the internet,
shared life ways,
and the problem with the internet is you can like, you choose when you want to have community, and then they show the best of themselves.
That's right.
They edit it down so it's just the best parts. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to deal with the human. You have to deal with like the mirage of the human.
Yes,
and
good.
You get to choose when you want to, and then when you don't want to, you're done, and then you can leave it. So it's not actual community. It's in a way like just a substitute,
right,
for actual people, and that is a huge problem that we have. It's why recently Australia, I think, banned social media for anyone under 18.
Oh yeah, exactly.
You may have seen that.
Right.
Which is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you should not, like, there's no need, there's no reason, there's no point to being on the internet, especially below 18.
Well, yeah, you want to, and I would describe it like this. This is a rough analogy, but I have no problem with calculators, but in elementary school, you should learn how to add, subtract, multiply, divide. And then, okay, the calculator can help you do that better
when you've got tougher problems.
When you've got tougher problems, and so you get through the calculation part easier to get to the but the technology comes in as a supplement to what you've already learned to do without it. And then you can optimize for the technology.
Right.
And people who form community through technology rather than, and this is back to the Australian thing, young people who come of age without playing in the sandbox, but rather playing with people online, without dealing with kids on recess or whatever, but instead dealing with people online. I think there's a problem in their formation.
You have a loss of function. Absolutely. That you don't know how to actually reach out and talk to real people.
Right.
That have real lives and will really say things that may grate you the wrong way, and you really have to deal with that in real time. And that's just how it works. Sorry. You can't close the computer on a real person.
Yep.
They're there, and you have to deal with it, and you have to deal with it correctly, because there's a reputation there, and suddenly there's a whole lot more components involved that are really necessary to understanding people around you, but also who you are as a person, which you don't get if you're just online. My parents didn't let me have a phone until I could drive, and I didn't have social media till I was 18.
Right.
I'm unbelievably thankful for that.
Yeah.
Because what was I going to do? I wasn't going to bless anyone on social media, right? One of the great things about the internet is that you are able to bless people from afar. Mm-hmm. I wasn't going to be doing that at 18.
Right. Well, and hopefully the blessing is maybe if you're giving too much time to your podcast, you need to spend some time, close it down, and go to coffee with somebody, for pity's sake.
Right. Absolutely. And when I say this isn't a substitute for community,
right,
it's not for me either.
Right.
Right. There's none of this is good enough.
Right. And I would say this is good only insofar as it might reinforce community
Absolutely.
rather than become proxy for it or substitute for it.
100%. Yeah. And if the goal is to bless other people, and then you have the right framework. If the goal is to get famous and get everyone to look at you, you're going to go about it all wrong. But if the goal is to bless other people, then you're thinking about it in a way of these are real people behind the camera, like you and I. They're not mirages. They're real people with real lives. And so how can I bless them in their real life?
Right. Well, and then you learn to see them that way by
interacting with real people.
By at home, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's possible for someone to bless unseen people. We support missionaries or something like that.
100%, yeah.
But you need to be faithful with what's in front of you and get the dirt under your fingernails in the relationships that are around you that are hard, that are pain in the keister.
100%.
Different people. You got to get along with them.
Absolutely. So when we talk about American Christianity, which we've done,
there we go.
Is there? We obviously don't want an American Christianity that is solely built around who has the loudest voice,
right?
Because then you end up with people like Joel Osteen, who is not a center of true biblical teaching,
right?
But is just very loud,
or the or the big box store pastor.
Right.
Like a lot of American Protestantism is big box store Protestantism.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do we get to a point where the American Christianity is the kind that has actual community with actual people, that is more localized?
I think part of it is to just not care what's happening online. We need to start not giving a rip about it, to see it as just unimportant.
Yeah.
So that would be the first thing. But coordinated with that, it's because we do care about the realities of word and sacrament and neighbor
and time
and time and that sort of thing. And then you really start caring. The husband should love his wife, not the image on the magazine. The reality, and so you can't not care without caring.
Right. Absolutely. I was talking to Stephen Haney earlier today, and I was talking to him about work-life balance, because he came from Amazon, which is obviously very competitive. A lot of executives there spend 100, 120 hours a week at these companies, like nonstop work. And I was like, how should a Christian go about work-life balance? It was very interesting what he told me, which was, you don't think about it like, how can I fit the most work in, and like, where's the cutoff where, okay, no more work, fine, I have to go hang out with my family.
Right.
You think about it more like, I've got life, and let's see if I can throw work in there. Right. Because I need to make money to pay for these people. But the point is life.
Right, exactly. So for the American Christian, like, how do we get there? It would mean self-conscious decisions that would look something like this. I will only listen to a podcast if I have prearranged for someone else to listen to a podcast, and we're going to get together and discuss it.
Yeah, something like that.
To sort of domesticate the online stuff to the service of the real
or
thing.
I'm mowing the lawn, and it's like, I'll just throw it on in the background.
Well, but then
why not?
But how about this? I think there's a benefit to not plugging yourself into noise all the time, and so the online stuff that I'll listen to only if someone else I have prearranged. He's going to listen to it. I'm going to listen to it. We're going to get together.
Like it's
community. So it's the he and I. It's similar to think about this, like watching a football game with guys getting together. Is it the football game? It's the guys getting together. So that can be great.
It's something to do.
It's something to do. if in the relationship with the guys.
Absolutely.
So can the online thing be the relationship with the guys
100%.
rather than I'm going to walk away from the relationship with the guys and do the
to
online
watch the
thing?
football? Absolutely. And one of the
That's what I'm
interesting
getting at.
things.
So don't listen to it even when you're cutting the lawn, unless the other guy's cutting his lawn doing the same thing, and you're going to get together over coffee to talk about it.
It's like what America used to have with like TV, where you didn't have your phone, so or your computer. You couldn't just go watch TV by yourself. Yeah, the TV was something in the living room, and if you wanted to watch TV, like you turned it on, everyone could see.
Right.
It was kind of everyone was watching together.
Right.
And you watch with your siblings or you watch with your parents, and it wasn't like everyone's watching their own thing that they find most entertaining.
Right, exactly. Now, that's an intermediate step, though, because I think that TV experience that you just described became a substitute for, I mean, it trained and catechized people in the 1950s and 60s to not deal with each other. So let's turn on the meaning. Instead of having an evening together in the living room where you and we're having conversation, we're involved in projects together, whatever it might be, we're all watching TV.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
So that was actually an intermediate step, I think. And so we're talking about an intermediate step to go back the other way.
Right.
But it's not the landing point.
It isn't the landing point, but it is a good first step, and it's it's something that's possible for a lot of people. Right. Because saying, okay, I'm just going to quit cold turkey, for a lot of people, they're like, okay, but then what do I do with my time? And they get into kind of like, okay, I'm too bored now.
Right.
I need to go watch social media, which I agree is not good. I think being bored is a fantastic thing.
Right.
But getting back to, hey, what if we watched more things in community, and it became like kind of like a card game.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you watch the football and you're commentating on it with your family.
Right.
As opposed to, here I am watching my football by myself.
Yeah, exactly. And it's got this distorting effect. If I could use an analogy, I think that we're familiar with, take the and this is kind of a pretty familiar trope, but the insecure teenage girl who has sort of anxiety about her body and her appearance, and the more she looks at media, the more she
doesn't help.
The more she compares herself and has an unrealistic view of her own self, because she is sizing herself up to this mediated, curated thing, right? And it becomes weird. Well, how many American Christians do the exact same thing with their church? They have body anxiety. They start despising their local church because of a curated sense of Christianity that they get into online.
Right.
And they get judgy about the people that they're supposed to deal with. And if there are problems, are there problems? Is their local church perfect? Absolutely not. But where do we get this impulse? This is my church. These are my people. So these are my problems that I'm going to lean into.
Right.
And I'm going to bless and help, warts and all, with this. And this is what God's called me to. And this is good. This is a good calling. I think American Christians suffer from the insecure girl body image issues with our church. And the body is the church. And we've got body image issues, and the online environment serves it.
And I think there is a point where, like, okay, enough is enough with this church. I need to leave. I have relatives who are in Atlanta, and they were at a church, and they had a problem with the pastor, and he was outspoken for homosexuality, and which is they didn't see it coming, and they were like, okay, this is not okay, and they talked to him a lot, and then they were like, all right, fine, we're done. Like, if that's what you're doing.
Right.
we're not going to be
right.
here anymore.
Just like you can have someone who really isn't, like, maybe you ought to brush your teeth, maybe, like, like
right.
the toothpaste ad is kind of getting at something,
yes. Maybe I need to not be friends with them anymore because they're not influencing me positively.
Right.
And I can't seem to like help them or influence them at all. But my mom was talking to someone a while back who had moved, got married in Florida, had some kids there, and then the family moved to Texas because they didn't like the church in Florida. And then after a while, they didn't like the church in Texas, so they moved to North Dakota.
Right.
And she was like, "Look, you." Because the lady was complaining that like
these
I keep running into
Christians
problems.
who are having plastic surgery on the body of Christ.
Yes, she was like, I keep running into problems with the people in my church. My mom was like, "You're always going to have problems. There's going to be a fight anywhere you go. So pick the people that you want to fight with, and then stand there and hold the line."
Right, but notice that, and I'll keep on pressing the analogy. That's like persons, I'm not comfortable in my body. I'm a boy who wants to be a girl, and so I'll take hormone therapy. It's interesting. Oftentimes, even conservative Christianity is in their religious practice, and I think I'm very intentional about calling it the body this way. It's the body of Christ, and we start becoming uncomfortable with the body of Christ, just like trans people are uncomfortable in their bodies.
Right,
and it's all falsifying, funhouse mirror distorting internet that feeds that.
Look at they're perfect over there.
Right. And and the connection between, trans, gender dysphoria people and what they're, finding online communities that sort of affirm them in that way is really tied to that.
Absolutely. And that's Doug, I don't know if you saw it, but Doug gave a talk at Charlie Kirk's. So it was some conference, which it was a fantastic talk. Mm-hmm. But the point of it is you were born for this time and in this hour.
Yeah.
And one of the problems he was pointing out was a lot of conservative Christians are like, man, I don't like that we're at a point where Joe Biden is president, where Kamala Harris had a chance to be president of the United States of America. Mm-hmm. Like what a wild piece of information, what a wild time that would have been. They're like, I don't like this time. And he's like, that is the exact same as what the transgender people are saying. Yeah, I don't like where I am, what I am. Right. And his point was, you are born for this time and in this hour. And that is true not only nationally, but I think he was also saying like locally. Right. You were born for this time and in this hour, for the people around you who are struggling, and they were born for you because you struggle. And that's just like, we're people. That's how it works. No one's perfect. Right. Despite what you may see on Instagram.
Right. Well, and on Instagram, I mean, another case in point, you mentioned, Trump and Kamala. How many people know who Trump and Kamala are, but don't know who their city council people are?
Far too many.
Far too many. And why? Because of the same reason we're talking about. We invest where we shouldn't invest. Right. We invest in the fight that the Lord hasn't called us to, rather than investing in the fight that the Lord has called us to. Right. In fact, learn, and then it's not that you should be unconcerned and unplugged. It's
we don't
fine
want
for you
Kamala
to know
Harris as president.
No, we don't. But in terms of like emotional energy, intellectual attention, we have lost our imagination about what can be done locally. Right. We spend our wheels on the stuff that's mediated rather than the stuff in front of us. In terms of like imagining what can happen, imagining what we meditate on stuff that we can't fix, rather than exercising stuff that we can fix and what we've got resources for right here with our neighbor. Right.
And I'm sure part of it is laziness. And also I was talking to David Shannon about this, that we're in what I believe he called a dopamine war. Basically, who can create the most positive attention and energy around their circle. And Trump won this year. Mm-hmm. He had the most positive. And there was some logical decision like, hey, I don't actually want my streets flooded with illegal aliens who are killing my friends and family. But there's it is a bit of a, like, who is the most popular. It's just a popularity contest as opposed to like a who has the best policies, who's going to do the most for our economy and for us in general. And part of it is also, I'm sure, a bit of laziness. That if you see a problem in your city council, it's the kind of thing that if you were to actually dedicate yourself, you could fix it.
Right.
If you see a problem with, the White House,
mm-hmm.
it will probably be 20 to 30 years before you could fix it, even if you were to like full bore ahead. This is what I'm doing.
But the way to fix the White House is actually to fix your city council. Like, that's how you learn, and that's how you exercise yourself on it.
Absolutely. And it's easier to like complain than actually do something productive.
Right. Which is, I would say, true of the Reformation of the church, which is even much more deeply. Invest yourself in word and sacrament and worship with your people that God's put you in front of and with and alongside. And then that will radiate out to neighbors, to community, and then to the ends of the earth. But I think the part of the problem with the gravitation toward the media stuff, it's an over-realized eschatology. It's trying to rush to the national platform, to the wide platform, without doing the hard work.
Absolutely, yeah. And you talked. I've heard you mention elsewhere Gresham Machen.
Yeah.
Am I saying that right?
Yeah, J. Gresham Machen.
Yeah,
it's Gresham.
Gresham, whom you named your first son after.
I named my first son after. Yes.
Yes. What can we learn from him in this moment that we're in?
What can we learn from him? I've got his picture up on the wall there.
There you go.
Yeah, boy. So many things. I think we can, first of all, we can learn to hold fast and sacrifice for a fight worth fighting. He was fighting for faithfulness within the church when the church was beset with compromise. And there are stories I could get into with his fight, but that would certainly be one thing. Another thing about Machen, and some of my thoughts and reflections about media are related to him. He waged his theological battles in the 1920s and 30s, which was also a real interesting time. Radio kind of comes on the scene in the 1920s, where, like, in 1920, most people did not have radio, although they had all heard of it by then. Whereas by 1929, most people did have a radio,
right.
And we've got, national or approaching national broadcast by then. He had a hard time understanding, like many people at this time, and in retrospect, we can learn from him, how the media worked, where he would actually write saying, no, the story of what's going on in the church has to do with compromise in this doctrine and this doctrine and this doctrine. And he would publish, editorials in the paper about this. One of the people that was compromised was a celebrity missionary. Her name was Pearl Buck, novelist, wrote The Good Earth. She won the, Pulitzer Prize or something like that. Famous novelist, and novelists were much more celebrities back then than novelists are today. Yeah. But she was a Presbyterian missionary, and she was writing a bunch of basically like Jesus is no better than Buddha or something like that. She was just unorthodox stuff. Yeah, she was just wrong. And Machen was calling out the church's missions board for having missionaries like this. And he had a hard time the media latched onto that because it was Pearl Buck.
Right.
And so she was the story. And the question is, what can we learn about Machen? It ties into all of this, where he had a hard time navigating the media environment, not understanding the difference between a media agenda and his agenda, so that when he would give an interview to someone in the press, I think he, like a lot of people at the time, didn't understand how that would just feed the beast, even though he's saying truth.
Right. Yeah. That his knowledge would actually bring about the thing he was trying to stop.
Right. Yeah. Only in retrospect. I mean, this is 1920s and 30s. I talk to my students about this. Charles Lindbergh was famous for his transatlantic flight. He was one of the big celebrities in the 1920s. And in this era, this was a new media environment in the 1920s. And so he had a baby, and this was in the press. Thousands of people all around sent him congratulatory notes from all around, like ordinary people like you and me, which just seems absurd. If some celebrity today has a baby, and maybe suppose it's a celebrity whose career you admire. You might admire them or whatever. You wouldn't write a personal note.
No.
And mail it, because we understand that a celebrity is a curated thing, and so there's some kind of distance. But in the 1920s, people didn't understand this.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we can learn about the good fight from Machen is, fighting the good fight, but also the limitations of media in fighting the good fight.
Yeah, that it can't be done exclusively with media.
In media, it's not that media is not a tool that you can use, but as the tool, even, it's got some limitations you got to be careful about.
There are better ways to do it.
Yeah, better ways to do it.
And different.
Right. And part of the reformation of the church, I think, has to do with forming ecclesial bonds that are, I would say, much more appropriately churchly, having to do with ordination vow, liturgy, creed, and shared experience in life together.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Somewhat shifting topics. You worked in national parks.
Yes.
I read on a resume somewhere you interpreted historical sites as a ranger.
A ranger, yes.
What does that all mean?
There are different kinds of park rangers. I was an interpretive ranger, which means that I would do programming for the public and help to interpret the resource for them. So the Park Service has historical resources and natural resources. You go to Yellowstone National Park, you've got these geothermal things, but then an interpretive ranger will take you on walks and explain things. And
don't step over there.
Well,
don't say hi to the bison.
Well, there is that, but probably more importantly, here's geologically what's happening here. That's, interpretation.
Right.
Now with me, I was at the Nez Perce National Historical Park, which is just a 50-minute drive south of here. And so the historic sites that I would interpret are sites that are connected with the Nimipu people, the Nez Perce Native Americans here. And there's a national park that's near here where I was a ranger. And so I do battlefield walks at the Whitebird Canyon. There's a mission site in Henry Spalding, who was a missionary to the Nez Perce people. And I do walks on that historic site there. And a host of things, sites that are those kind of historic sites.
Do you still do that?
No longer with the National Park Service.
Okay.
But it's interesting. I started doing some of these tours. I think that's what got me the Park Service job.
Oh, really?
Because I teach history and I'm a history guy.
Yeah.
And then here's this historical park. And so he's the guy who comes through and brings tour groups through. And so they hire me.
Why don't we employ him?
Yeah, they employ, which I was very grateful for, because that gave me access to resources in the archives and some connections there, so that my knowledge, profoundly deepened of the very history that I was already giving tours of. And now I give much better tours thanks to my time at the Park Service. But just due to logistical reasons and, and the demands here at New St. Andrews College, my tenure at the Park Service has sort of run dry. I've still got great relationships there, and I bring people through, and they've brought me in to be like the outside speaker in the speaker series sometimes too.
That's fun. So, as far as the creation of national parks, what is there some sort of official thing that needs to happen before it is ordained as a national park?
Yes, there's a process. I don't know all the details of the process, but there needs to be a petition and sponsorship that ultimately, in order for it's Congress that creates a national park, congressional legislation.
Okay.
And so every national park is approved by Congress and so designated as a national park.
Okay.
And it has to have some sort of significance to that's fitting for the mission of the U.S. National Park Service, which has to do with peculiar resources of the United States. And those resources are going to be either natural resources like Yellowstone National Park.
Got it.
Historical, Independence Hall, the, Liberty, I can't remember what that national park is called, but buildings like Independence Hall in Philadelphia, that's a national park site.
Yeah. And then as far as things like Yellowstone, what is it in California? The big one.
Yosemite.
Yosemite, there you go. Yep. Or Glacier or things like that. Is it just, hey, this is a cool spot, you should check it out, and we don't want deforestation there? Or what's the qualifications?
It's it has to be unique, which means if places like this are a dime a dozen all over the place,
right?
Then no. So it's got to be unique. So like Independence Hall, that's where the Continental Congress, signed the Declaration of Independence. That's also where they signed the Constitution. That's a
somewhat noteworthy.
So there are not other buildings where that happened.
Right. Yeah.
So there's that, but also there's the only at Yellowstone, those geothermal features don't exist anywhere else in the world. Those geysers and the in a place like that. Yellowstone is basically it's a volcano that's not a mountain.
Yeah.
That's
I've read it's like a super volcano that is supposed to blow up at some point.
Yeah, and so you've got these, the hot springs, the geysers, all those, again, I'd say geothermal feet. I'm not the scientist guy who can give you the guided walk there, but yeah, that's unique. And so, we probably don't want to plow over that and just develop it.
You also don't want to let it erupt. So best to keep an eye on it.
Well, yeah, but I'm not sure that we could prevent that. But
that's fair. But we could clear people out.
The geysers are erupting with some regularity, which is interesting.
Yes, which is such a wild phenomenon.
Oh,
that
it is.
We could every 10 minutes or 30 minutes a geyser will go off, and we're like, that seems somewhat reasonable. Let's all watch.
Yeah, exactly.
Very wild.
But it's got to anyway. In order to be a national park, it's got to be significant and unique. This is all very broad. There's so many different types of national parks, whether they're natural features. Joshua Tree National Park is just one of the only places in this world where this certain kind of tree grows, or sequoia. Okay, we're gonna these are these awesome trees. And so we're going to turn this into a park because this is pretty
and we don't want people chopping them down.
Right, exactly.
We want to keep them as long as possible.
Yep.
Yeah. What would be your best piece of advice you would give to anyone watching this?
Well, boy, I guess pertaining to some of the topics we've discussed, I would say at church this Sunday, talk to someone you haven't met and get to know their story. Get to know their story and invest.
Right.
So there you go. Something very particular on the to-do list. And then learning stories, then that can expand into history and all kinds of stuff too.
Yeah. Meet new people.
Yeah, meet new people, get to know them, and recognize like who are your people. The people are the people right next to you, and so spend a lot more time investing in them than you do in poking around online and who is platforming whom else and who is that sort of thing.
Yeah. Where can people find you at NSA and all of that?
They can find me at NSA. Come visit
New
me
St. Andrews.
New St. Andrews College. Yeah, I don't have a website. You can probably tell by my posturing here.
Yes.
I don't have a web. Although there are some people who say, "Oh, Chris, you should probably put some of your stuff up on a website." But anyway, you can find me at New St. Andrews. You can email me and find my contact information through www.nsa.edu.
There you go. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
All right.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, great to talk to you. Thanks a lot.
See you guys.